War is a racket. It's a brutal, messy business, and it always makes somebody a whole lot of money. We're told wars are fought for noble reasons: freedom, democracy, the greater good. But behind the flag waving and the patriotic anthems, there's a much uglier truth. The truth is, wars are often fueled by greed, plain and simple. Greed for power, greed for resources, and most of all, greed for cold, hard cash. Think about it. Who really benefits when a country goes to war? Is it the soldier on the front line risking their life for a few dollars a day? Is it the family back home struggling to make ends meet while their loved one is deployed overseas? Of course not. The real winners are the ones who stand to profit from the conflict: the arms manufacturers, the defense contractors, the politicians who line their pockets with campaign contributions from the military-industrial complex. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's a matter of public record. The influence of money in politics is a well-documented phenomenon. Politicians rely on wealthy donors and corporations to fund their campaigns. In return, these donors expect favorable policies, including decisions about when and where to go to war. And so, the cycle continues. The politicians get their money, the corporations get their contracts, and the rest of us get stuck footing the bill, both literally and figuratively. It's time to see through the propaganda and acknowledge the uncomfortable truth. Wars are often driven by profit, not principle. And until we address the systemic issues of greed and corruption that fuel these conflicts, we'll continue to see innocent lives lost and trillions of dollars wasted in the name of someone else's bottom line. We like to think of our elected officials as public servants, working tirelessly for the betterment of their constituents. And while some undoubtedly are, the reality is that many are more concerned with maintaining their own power and influence. And what better way to consolidate power than by engaging in a good old-fashioned war? Wars create a culture of fear and uncertainty, making the public more likely to accept restrictions on their freedoms and to rally behind their leaders. This allows politicians to push through controversial legislation and expand their authority under the guise of national security. It's a tactic as old as time itself. Remember the Patriot Act? That little gem of legislation, passed in the wake of 9/11s, significantly expanded the government's surveillance powers, all in the name of keeping us safe. Of course, the politicians who start wars rarely suffer the consequences of their actions. They don't send their own children to fight on the front lines. They don't have to worry about bombs raining down on their homes or losing their livelihoods in the economic fallout. No, they sit comfortably in their air-conditioned offices, making life or death decisions from afar, all while enjoying the perks and privileges of their positions. And let's not forget about the revolving door between government and the defense industry. It's not uncommon for former politicians and military officials to take cushy jobs at defense contractors, leveraging their connections and insider knowledge to secure lucrative contracts. These cozy relationships create a powerful incentive for perpetual war, as those in power benefit both financially and politically from a state of constant conflict. Now, let's talk about the real winners in any war: the corporations that profit from death and destruction. We're talking about the arms manufacturers, the defense contractors, the companies that supply everything from bullets to bandages. These companies make billions, even trillions of dollars from armed conflicts around the world. And they have a vested interest in keeping those conflicts going for as long as possible. Take the war in Iraq, for example. The US government spent an estimated $2 trillion on the war. Where did all that money go? A significant portion went straight into the pockets of companies like Halliburton, Bechtel, and Lockheed Martin. These companies were awarded no-bid contracts, meaning they faced no competition and could essentially charge whatever they wanted for their services. And it's not just the big-ticket items like tanks and fighter jets. These companies also profit from everyday supplies like food, water, and even toilet paper. Remember the $640 toilet seat or the $435 hammer? These outrageous examples of wartime overcharging are just the tip of the iceberg. The truth is, war profiteering is rampant, and it costs taxpayers billions of dollars every year. The worst part is, these companies are often rewarded for their profiteering with even more government contracts. It's a vicious cycle, and it's one that lines the pockets of the few at the expense of the many. We're constantly told that we live in a democracy, that our voices matter, and that we have a say in how our government is run. But when it comes to decisions about war and peace, The reality is far different. The truth is, our choices are often limited by a system that is rigged in favor of the wealthy and powerful. Think about it. How much influence do you really have over your elected officials? Sure, you can vote, but what if both candidates are in the pocket of the military-industrial complex? What if the media is controlled by corporations that profit from war? What if the entire system is designed to silence dissent and manufacture consent? It's easy to feel powerless in the face of such a system. But it's important to remember that we, the people, still have power in numbers. We can hold our elected officials accountable. We can demand transparency in government spending. We can support organizations that are working to expose war profiteering and promote peace. The first step is to educate ourselves about the true costs of war and the hidden agendas that drive these conflicts. Once we understand the problem, we can start to work towards solutions. Section 5. Hidden agendas. Let's be clear, not all wars are driven solely by greed. Sometimes there are legitimate national security concerns at play. But even in those cases, it's important to be wary of hidden agendas and ulterior motives. Politicians are masters of using fear and patriotism to manipulate public opinion and justify military intervention. Take the 2003 invasion of Iraq, for example. The Bush administration claimed that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction and posed an imminent threat to the United States. These claims were later proven false, but not before the U.S. had invaded Iraq, toppling Saddam Hussein's regime and plunging the country into chaos. So what was the real reason for the Iraq War? Was it about spreading democracy, securing oil supplies, or was it simply about consolidating U.S. power in the Middle East? The answer is likely a combination of all of the above. The point is, there were hidden agendas at play, and the American people were misled. This is not an isolated incident. Throughout history, governments have used a variety of pretexts to justify going to war, from protecting national interests to defending human rights. But more often than not, these justifications are just a smokescreen for more cynical motives. In the age of information, it's easier than ever to access a wealth of knowledge about any given topic. However, it's also easier than ever to spread misinformation and propaganda. This is especially true when it comes to war, where the truth is often the first casualty. Governments and the media often work hand in hand to control the narrative surrounding conflicts, portraying their actions in the most favorable light possible. They use carefully crafted language, selective reporting, and even outright lies to shape public opinion and drum up support for military action. Remember the incubator baby story during the First Gulf War? This widely circulated story, which alleged that Iraqi soldiers had removed Kuwaiti babies from incubators and left them to die, was later revealed to be a complete fabrication. But it served its purpose, generating outrage and rallying public support for the war effort. The reality is, war is messy and complicated, and there are often multiple sides to every story. But the media often presents a simplified black and white narrative that makes it difficult for the public to form informed opinions. This lack of objective information makes it all too easy for those in power to manipulate public opinion and justify their actions. It's easy to get caught up in the rhetoric of war, with its talk of patriotism, courage, and sacrifice. But it's important to remember that war has a very real human cost. Behind every statistic, every casualty report, every news story, there are real people whose lives are forever changed by conflict. The most obvious cost of war is the loss of human life. Millions of people, both combatants and civilians, are killed in wars every year. Countless others are wounded, both physically and psychologically. The scars of war can last a lifetime, leaving many survivors with permanent disabilities, chronic pain, and deep emotional trauma. But the costs of war extend far beyond the battlefield. Economies are devastated, infrastructure is destroyed, and entire generations are robbed of their futures. The money that is spent on war could be used to address pressing social problems, such as poverty, hunger, and disease. Instead, it's funneled into the coffers of the military-industrial complex. The truth is, war is a failure on every level. It's a failure of diplomacy, a failure of leadership, and a failure of humanity. And it's a failure that we can no longer afford. So what can we do about it? How do we break this cycle of war and profiteering? The first step is to demand transparency and accountability from our elected officials. We need to know who is influencing their decisions, where our tax dollars are going, and what the true costs of war are. We need to shine a light on the corrupting influence of money in politics and hold our leaders accountable for their actions. We can support campaign finance reform, demand greater transparency in government contracts, and pressure our elected officials to prioritize diplomacy over military intervention. We can also support organizations that are working to expose war profiteering and promote peace. There are many groups out there doing important work, from investigative journalists to human rights activists to peace advocacy organizations. By supporting these groups, we can help to amplify their voices and challenge the status quo. Remember, our elected officials work for us. It's time to remind them of that. We need to hold their feet to the fire and demand better. We deserve a government that prioritizes peace, diplomacy, and the well-being of its citizens over the profits of war profiteers. The truth is, we can't afford another war. The human and financial costs are simply too high. We need to find a better way, a way that prioritizes peace, diplomacy, and cooperation over conflict and violence. This isn't a naive dream. It's a matter of survival. We are at a crossroads in human history. We can continue down the path of war and destruction, or we can choose a different future, a future where peace and cooperation prevail. The choice is ours. We can continue to allow ourselves to be manipulated by fear, greed, and propaganda. Or we can educate ourselves, raise our voices, and demand better from our leaders. We can create a world where war is not a business, where human life is valued over profit, and where diplomacy is the first resort, not the last. The time for change is now. Let's reclaim our future. Let's choose peace.